My guest today is Dr. K. The mysterious Dr. K is the co-founder of Quai Network, a new layer one network of blockchains that scales to handle all human commerce while maintaining true decentralization. Very interesting. Welcome to the show, Dr. K.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. Let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. It'd be great if you could please introduce yourself. Love to hear a little bit of your personal and professional backstory, what you've been doing in the lead up to founding Quai Network.
Yeah, so I kind of got into crypto back in about 2012 as a hobby throughout grad school. Kind of thought about leaving to go full time, but back in that time frame, it's kind of hard to find full time work. So I ended up finishing my doctorate, and I ended up going to work for a company called Consensus. Did a spin out called Grid Plus, designed and built the Lattice One hardware wallet. During that time, I kind of came up with an idea of how to scale proof of work blockchains called BlockReduce. Ended up getting an NSF grant with Prof at UT. Kind of was working on it sort of part time. And then in beginning of 22, one of my collaborators managed to spearhead a raise with Polychain Capital, and then decided to work on Quai full time. And I've been working on it for about 2 years full time now. So it's kind of my background. Double degreed engineer, doctorate from UT.
Very good. Thank you for that, Dr. K. Please tell us a bit more about Quai Network then. Love to hear. Just to begin with, let's have I guess like a high level summary of what you guys are trying to do, a vision statement, if you like.
Yeah, so the vision statement really is that we're trying to build a cryptocurrency that can replace the current monetary system. High level vision, full stop. I go way back in the crypto timeline, and the original sort of vision was sort of promised as that, right? At the very minimum, Bitcoin marketed itself as digital cash. And there are some compelling arguments against why you want a decentralized, credibly neutral digital money system. Unfortunately, as we've seen the kind of crypto space evolve, there have been technological insufficiencies that have been inadequate to meet the goal of sort of rebuilding the next monetary system or creating the next monetary system. Specifically, I think a lot of people focus on scalability, right? And that's one of the core things that we're addressing. But when we talk about scalability, we can't just do scale. We have to do scale while maintaining an economically decentralized system, right? And that's really the core tenet of what we're doing at Quai. But when I say monetary system, I'm actually talking about a little bit broader of a scope, and that one of the things that Bitcoin moved to from digital cash was the concept of digital gold. And I think rebranding itself as digital gold was actually admitting to failure. How often is gold used as money today? Incredibly rarely. Basically, they said, we don't know how to scale. Ergo, we have to move away from digital cash into digital gold to sort of justify the usefulness of this network going forward, right? Now, in that narrative, right, and this kind of is biting them right now too, and that they talk about the security budget and will it be sufficient to maintain security over time. As digital gold, it is very difficult at 5 TPS to envision a world where you can strictly have fees go to secure proof of work network. And so when we think about Quai, we're not just thinking about scale, we're also thinking about the monetary design. So specifically within Quai, we kind of have this concept of what we call Gresham's law. And what we really think of it is that actually is Gresham's paradox, which is Gresham's law basically states if you have an inferior form of money and a superior form of money, the superior money will be hoarded, the inferior money will be circulated. So in the case of Bitcoin acting as digital gold, we see that people hoard that Bitcoin all the time. So Bitcoin finds itself in this conundrum, which is how do I get long-term security, fees, and viability economically? Even if I could technically scale, they would still technically have a problem because they must presume that no other inferior money exists outside of the system. Else Bitcoin will be hoarded and the other thing will be spent, which is the behavior that we see currently in the world, right? When I have Bitcoin, if I'm going to buy something, I always spend my dollars before I spend my Bitcoin. I'll only spend the Bitcoin if it's a very niche case or I don't have a good payments rails to use a dollar. I'll always prefer spending the dollars over spending Bitcoin. So that kind of sets up a problem. So one of the other pieces that we've introduced with QUAI is the concept of a two-token system. One that is meant as a store of value, QUAI, and one that's meant as a unit of account and medium of exchange, QI. So we're also encompassing the monetary design within our system, and then QI is a very interesting item to talk about. We can dive into it in a little bit, but effectively, it's an intrinsic value token that ties the price of QI to ideally the price of electricity. So it's not a direct peg, but we create a game that makes a Schelling point that causes the market value of QI to want to approach a marketable value of electricity.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And look, you're exactly right, Dr. K, in terms of Bitcoin has really been rebranded. Well, certainly the dominant narrative in Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is digital gold or a store of value. And even hardcore Bitcoiners will say Bitcoin is not for spending at the moment. You save in Bitcoin, which kind of works if you want to protect your wealth and beat inflation. Chances are you can do that by putting your fiat currency into Bitcoin. But you're right in that it is not really used as a medium of exchange at the moment, Dr. K. One thing that Bitcoin does have going for it, of course, though, is the call it what you want, the immaculate conception of Bitcoin, which can't really be pulled off again, Dr. K, or it's very difficult because, Bitcoin had that sort of fair launch. Anyone could mine it, anyone could get involved, and no one thought it would have value at the beginning, and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is, how do you kind of approach getting around that with launching something new like Quai Network, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, great set of questions. Right, I think one challenge in crypto is there's a lot of complex terms and a lot of complex ideas that get thrown around a lot, and it's actually very hard to form definitions around them. Just some examples of that are decentralization, right? It's a super loaded word. We all kind of know what it means, but how do we define it and sort of what are the important aspects of it, right? And there's another word you threw out there, which was fair. The concept of fairness is a very subjective one, which is interesting that we throw it around so readily when we're trying to talk about objective work-based systems. But I guess my concept of fairness doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters is effectiveness, right? So in some ways, I could say you could argue that Bitcoin was a fair launch because everybody sort of had this equal opportunity to mine it. But I could also say not everybody knew about it, so not everybody had the equal opportunity to mine it. But I can also posit, is that really the goal of the system? The goal of the system is to suck in the greatest amount of value possible and create the greatest utility for the participants in the system, right? So fairness, in my mind, isn't even an actual goal. It's a goal of effectiveness. Now, within the word effectiveness, there is some idea or modicum of that concept of fairness, because if you create a distribution system or you create an allocation that is wildly out of scope, you will end up reducing your effectiveness because you won't get value into the system for the money that was put out, or you'll prevent later entrants because it's too concentrated. So within that term effective, I think there is some concept of the word fair, but having a purely reductionist a definition of fair being as a purely mined token, I think is an inadequate description of what really has to happen. I will say, in terms of the immaculate conception piece, one of the powerful pieces of Bitcoin was that Satoshi came, he got it started, and he went away, right? And having a cult of personality long term in a protocol is deleterious to creating a protocol. Now, at the same time, I will say that Bitcoin is so technologically insufficient that it is doomed at the protocol level. So you're actually going to try to balance something here wherein you would like a protocol that can heuristically meet the physical limitations of the internet to function as a digital monetary system. You want that protocol to become sort of ossified. And part of that ossification process is not having an active creator there to or cult of personality to change and mutate it over time, because that's really the goal of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a protocol that's a money system that doesn't change, that everybody can use, right? So I think you can balance those things, and if you seriously kind of put scrutiny to some of those Bitcoin narratives, I think these answers can be had and can make sense.
Yeah. And look, fantastic perspectives, Dr. K. And, one of the advantages that people such as yourself and teams such as your team, I suppose, have is that, Bitcoin obviously was deployed into the wild, if you like, 2008, 2009, something like that. So how long ago is that? 18 years, whatever it is.
Years getting old.
Which is, that's a long time ago, right? So as genius as, Bitcoin was at the time, as you've kind of pointed out, there are limitations to Bitcoin. And with the benefit of hindsight and the benefit of 18 years advance and, blockchain progression, I suppose, it is now possible to address some of those scaling efficiencies and so on and so forth. But one of the other sides of this, of course, though, is, and I guess I'm just playing devil's advocate in one way, Dr. K, and it's good to kind of tease this out. But Bitcoin has the Lindy effect simply because it has been around for so long. It has it has brand staying power, if you like. Everyone has heard of Bitcoin, but not everyone has heard of all the other new blockchains that are launching now. So it's great to be able to address all of Bitcoin's problems, limitations, and inefficiencies. But the challenge, of course, is getting users onto the network and being able to give value to the tokens, get people to build on your network. How do you think about that?
Yeah, great question. So to kind of echo your first point, right? I speak about Bitcoin as being technologically insufficient, but to give everybody their due, the reason that we can come in and design a system that we think can be the last mover in the blockchain space is because we've seen so many other attempts at it. Right. There are tons of innovations and there are tons of lessons that have been learned, and we're taking those lessons with a first principle physics-based approach and using them to design what we think is the physically limited heuristic optimal system. So in terms of getting somebody to use the network, when I think about tokens and I think about money, let me posit this question to you. What do you think gives money value?
Well, I suppose it's like it's a belief system, and it's the idea that I can exchange that money for whatever goods or services that I want, and be confident that I can do that.
Right. So that's a reciprocal expectation, right? So you think money has value because in the future you're going to be able to go to somebody else and you're going to be able to exchange it for a good and service. So you've gotten half of the equation. I think the other half of the equation is utility, right? And they're not necessarily fully divided. They're not fully divisible, but those are kind of the two tenets. So what gives money value is utility and future expected value. So the goal within QUAI, and I think we have a very technologically unique solution, which I do think is heuristically approaching the optimal system within the constraints of physics. I'm confident to say that we can maximize aggregate utility of the system, like full stop. So we can create a system that will have the lowest fees with the greatest throughput for the greatest number of users. We'll have the concept of having a store of value. We'll have a concept of a medium of exchange. We'll have a concept of a unit account linked to the price of energy, sort of all within one system. I think that we can approach what is possible within a crypto economic system. Now, the second point then is, how do I maximize value? Because in the long-term equilibrium, I am convinced that some system, I'm convinced of two things. I'm convinced if humans have electricity, computers, and the internet, that we will be using a crypto-like system in the future. I am also convinced that that crypto-like system in long-term equilibrium will look like QUAI. It might not be QUAI, but it will look like QUAI. So then to the second part of your question is, how do you win the value game? Because I can create the utility, but if I don't also create the usership, you won't create the flywheel. And if you don't create the flywheel, it could take 100 years for the equilibrium to manifest, which is, it's a problem that many projects suffer from, except I think most projects don't actually have a large amount of utility differentiation. But we can go down that path later. So in terms of the user base, there are core features that we see as being technologically differentiated that we can offer to existing user bases and customers that no other chain can offer. Right? In the long term, we see ourselves as being able to replace the monetary system entirely. But as a go-to-market, we see three things that we can do that nobody else can do. We can get rid of MEV. So we have a MEV-resistant mechanism called mined transactions. That is very valuable for DEXs, users of DEXs, and various DeFi applications. There are companies, like we have a partnership with Rarible, and Rarible has a barrier to onboarding Web2 companies into Web3 because they can't guarantee low price, large quantity mints over time. But with QUAI, because we can dynamically increase supply transactions with demand, we can guarantee that if you mint an NFT and it's a penny today, it'll be a penny tomorrow, and it'll be a penny in 10 years. That's a guarantee that we can make that nobody else can really make. So Rarible finds that attractive and wants to launch their partnerships on our platform. The third item is payments. So there's two things that we're doing in the payment sphere. One is scalability, and I know that scalability is sort of this overused and trite term because many people have promised it and few, if any, have delivered. They certainly haven't done so in a decentralized way. But let me just say, I think we can achieve scale in a decentralized way, and we can dig into that in a second. But then the other thing that we're achieving is an endogenous unit of account, i.e. QI, being an intrinsic value token tied to the price of electricity. So the third go-to-market that we have that nobody else has is payments in areas where you have people that have unstable nation-state currencies and have been looking to cryptocurrencies as a mechanism of actual everyday life and commerce. We can play in that arena, no one else can. BNB tried to play there, fees went up, Buenos Aires got priced out. They moved to Tron. Once they started using Tron, fees went up, they got priced out. What'll happen with QUAI? We go into Buenos Aires, they use QI to start denominating things, or they use a stable token. Doesn't actually matter to begin with. But the important part is that when the usership goes up, the transactions goes up, boop, another shard will be added, fees will remain stable, and they'll be able to keep using the chain. So we can actually support the commerce mechanism. And so those are our three differentiated go-to-markets. I think it's a foolish idea to try to say we're going to buy copy pasta apps or existing user bases by buying a DEX to come build on our thing or do an integration. I don't think that's how you win this game. I think you win it by being very strategic, where our customer cost of acquisition can be much lower because we can do something that nobody else can do. And that's really our focus.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think you raise a great point just with the stable coins. Not to bring it back to Bitcoin again, but that's there was sort of this great hope that Bitcoin would be adopted first, perhaps in the developing world. Bank the unbanked and so on, remittances. But because I guess of Bitcoin's volatility and of course the transaction limits and the high fees. It turns out people in the developing countries would often much rather use USD-based stablecoins just because it's actually much more effective and it solves their problems Yeah, in a way that perhaps Bitcoin doesn't yet, even with things like the Lightning Network. But look, I'd love to, understand a bit more about, you describe in the docs for Quai Network, you talk about how the network is able to coordinate an infinite number of blockchains by using the Proof-of-Entropy-Minima, a consensus mechanism, which is fantastic. It's technical sounding. We don't need to get super technical, but you'll need to get a bit technical, Dr. K, to just describe some of this. But, so however you want to just kind of get into how you see your blockchain as different and perhaps being able to achieve the scalability that you're talking about, 50,000 transactions per second. Yeah, how do we achieve this?
Yeah, no, great question. So Quai is a hierarchy of merge mine blockchains. So we have effectively a dynamically adjusting or ontologically adjusting sort of a pyramid of chains, and it changes the number of chains in the hierarchy with demand. So when we go to market, there'll be effectively a single branch of chains, and we'll have a prime chain, a region chain, and a zone chain. And then eventually, when demand increases, it kind of bumps out and starts creating a wider and wider base. There will only ever be one prime chain. There can be many region chains, up to 16 region chains and up to 16 zone chains. So we technically have a limit right now of 255 shards. But the really interesting thing that we're doing here is, you mentioned POEM, which is proof of entropy minima. So we have a new consensus mechanism. It's based off work, but it more accurately weighs the weight of a block based off the mathematic combinatorics of creating that block. And we do it in a way such that we will always create guaranteed unique weighting of every block. So we never have contention in the network about which block we're picking, right? So POEM is actually a key piece to being able to coordinate and shard this hierarchical system of blockchains. But the other thing that's cool in this hierarchy is the incentive for miners to extend each one of these zone chains is the same incentive that causes them to create what we call dominant blocks, are blocks in the region or prime chains, and those are the blocks which coordinate the zone chains. So we only have one mechanism, which is mine the longest tip on one of these zone chains, and you are also incentivized to mine a region and a prime block. And in doing that, you're guaranteeing cross coordination of the system eventually, right? So there's no like fancy mechanisms. There's no fishermen. There's like no watchtowers. Mine a zone, and you will be contributing to the aggregate security of the hierarchy, and you will eventually be able to send and receive transactions from anywhere in that hierarchy. But it's all done under the very, very simple premise of mine the longest chain in a zone.
Yeah, and one of the just with the mining, am I right in thinking that you're hoping to make mining the network, reasonably user friendly for just the average user, GPU mining, right?
Yeah, so part of that friendliness is the fact that miner can run what we call a slice. So a slice is one of sort of the branches of the hierarchy. So basically, every miner needs to run the prime chain. They get to pick a region chain, and they get to pick a zone chain under the region chain. And so they'll end up sort of running a node that has quote unquote 3 chains. Now, there's no state in region or prime. They're just really header chains. So they're really running one blockchain plus sort of 2 header chains. But when they're mining, they're effectively proposing a block that could be valid in any one of these contexts. And then depending on the amount of work that they achieve, they'll get a zone block, or they'll get a region block, or they'll get a prime block. And when they do that, that's how these sort of hash-linked references between the different chains get formed, and how transactions transit the hierarchy. But what that means from a miner's perspective is, even if we're running with 100 shards, their barrier to participation is still just running this one slice node. So they can make plenty of money and have plenty of assurance of operating on a canonically valid tip by only keeping a finite amount of state, even if we keep scaling, right? So this is like a truly a sharded system, and that our expectation when we're running in a 3x3 ontology at 4,000 TPS, a miner's node requirements will still only be about a terabyte in totality if they want to trim on a 1 month basis. So they could trim state and just have about 1 terabyte of data requirement, even at a total aggregate system throughput of about 4,000 TPS. So, it's important from our perspective when we talk about scaling, we start talking about node requirements to make sure the node requirements remain relatively constant, even though scale can go up dramatically. So we have a miner put together. It's using a prog-pow algorithm. If miners want to participate, we actually have a testnet running. It's an incentivized testnet. They can get on Hive OS, point their miners at a node and produce blocks, and then they'll ultimately get a reward ratio of that on mainnet. So yeah, you can absolutely mine. It's like GPU mining with the sort of traditional tools, including Stratum and Hive OS.
Yeah, look, sounds fantastic, and it's great to see that there is a little bit of a trend back to GPU mining, and this idea of Bitcoin was supposed to have a kind of democratic mining system in the beginning, but of course, well, we know how that went. But so it's great to see, people trying to get back to that idea. I know the Tari guys are trying to do something similar, even though that is like it's a proof of work protocol, merge mined with Monero of all things. So that'll be interesting. But you said testnet, Dr. K. So I think it's called the Iron Age testnet. Is that the current testnet? So if that's the case, maybe just put this into context in terms of, I don't know, whatever you call it, the production roadmap, road to mainnet. What does that look like? What are the different phases that need to roll out? Because I mean, it's what you guys are building looks incredibly ambitious. It looks like it is kind of on the bleeding edge of blockchain. Very exciting. But yeah, what does the rollout look like?
Yeah, so the simple answer to your question is mainnet is planned for summer of this year. We're about very shortly to announce our Golden Age testnet.
Put a date
Golden
on
Age.
that, because it's I'm in New Zealand, so it's summer for me right now. So
Fair enough. So summer would be I guess summer ends in August here. So by August of this year, we'll be on mainnet. The next testnet that we're running, hopefully we'll announce in the next month, is Golden Age. Golden Age should largely be a feature complete testnet. And then once we run that, we'll have a few modifications. We have a Silicon Age testnet, which is effectively the dress rehearsal at that point for mainnet. But there aren't really any features planned to go in between Golden and Silicon. So that's sort of where we do pen testing, where we do auditing, so on and so forth. In terms of what we've shown in the system, and maybe more broadly, instead of being specific, really what we're trying to do here at Quai is build a protocol, which means we want this system to pretty much be baked by the time we launch it. We're not, wanting to create a roadmap with enigmatic features and ideas and economic changes in the future, right? We're trying to design a system that, there could be bugs, right? And bugs happen, but our goal is to not be changing the protocol if we can at all avoid it, right? So we've been working for, this idea actually goes back 5 years, and I was working on it sort of as a research project for a couple, but full time for the last two. And one of the reasons we're spending 2 years building the stack, it's going to be close to 3 years by the time we launch it, is because we want it to be a protocol when we launch it. And we also understand too that when you're building at the edge, it's much more efficient to be able to build when you're not in a running system. Everything gets inordinately more expensive 100x pretty much more expensive to try to iterate when you're on a running system. So our goal was to get a system that we're happy with before we started running. And that's really what we've been spending our time doing. That being said, in Iron Age, the biggest feature of this, where you get that hierarchical merge mindset of change, the poem consensus, was proved out, in this last testnet, and that really is that magic sauce. The funny thing is, we didn't necessarily even have to do that before mainnet because we're going to mainnet with one shard. It might take us 6 months to go to 2 shards or a year to go to 2 shards. And we spent the last 3 years figuring out how to operate a sharded system, right? We could have rushed to market and said, oh, we'll figure it out when it's live. But that's not the path that we wanted to take because, like I said, we're trying to build a protocol. We're not trying to build a roadmap.
Yep, got it. Makes sense. Look, Dr. K, as we finish up this part of the podcast, you have a wealth of resources on various different websites and so on. For people that are interested in getting involved and learning more, there could be developers, there could be miners, people that, investors even, I don't know. Tell people where they can go and the kind of things they can do to start getting involved.
Yeah, we have a lot of things to get involved with from the developer side. If you drop into our Discord, you can learn about our grants program. There's grants for developing different applications, deploying stuff in testnet. From a node perspective, there's incentives for miners in the testnet to run nodes and to mine blocks. From other sort of interest standpoint, if you want to learn more about sort of how we're technologically meeting these demands, I have a whole series of YouTube videos where I go through the different sort of technological innovations that we're adding into QUAI that are good, starting points to sort of understand what we're doing. Yeah, and then there's the docs page as well. Kind of has some good resources there. Yeah, I think those are good resources for people.
And I'll have links to all of those resources in the show notes, listeners. I think what we do now, Dr. K, is we go to a very quick break and then we come back. We finish off, we have some fun. We're going to run you through the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round. Back in 1 second. And boom, just like that, we are back. And I'm with Dr. K. Dr. K, of course, is the co-founder of Quai Network. Very interesting bleeding edge blockchain or network of blockchains even. Energy-based money for the 21st century. It's very interesting. But Dr. K, I like to finish each podcast with a quick round of rapid-fire crypto conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
Before we do that, we never actually got to really talk about Qi, if we could, for a minute before we do the hot takes.
Absolutely. Well, we can incorporate it in. So yeah, please, Qi, go for gold.
Yeah. So the cool thing about Qi is there's been this concept of stable tokens on blockchains, and those stable tokens kind of come in different flavors. There's been CDPs, there's been custodian, and there's been sort of algorithmic, right? And I guess algorithmic and CDPs maybe the same thing. The one I maybe will focus on here is USDC to kind of pick on it. But the problem that we see with USDC is we're trying to create decentralized systems, but we're saying we don't have a unit of account. So what we're going to do is we're going to hypothecate a unit of account that's then custodian by a traditional financial institution against the traditional gatekeepers. And that is the dependency for this decentralized system to have a unit of account. We don't think that's a very good idea. I could even sort of, look into my crystal ball, look into the future, and say, if you have a system that has a set of on-chain incentives and it also has a large amount of collateralized real-world assets like dollars in that system because it needs those to effectively have value, there could end up being a contentious fork where the custodian or administrator of USDC effectively has the final word in what happens with that fork. And that could be some form of censorship, that could be some form of something. We don't know. That could be a monetary policy change, et cetera. And if I look at who runs USDC and who they're beholden to in terms of their interest, effectively via the banking system, you could argue either Janet Yellen or Jay Powell would then sort of own that system. So if there's $100 billion of USDC and Ethereum and there's a fork, Janet Yellen is going to have an outsized say in what happens with that fork. So that does not seem good to us. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to strategize a system to remove that centralizing dependency of having a unit of account inside of these decentralized systems, because it's clearly needed. There's clearly a product market fit for it. And because of that, it will be created if no other alternative is presented. So the reason that we're so interested in Qi is to remove that centralized dependency on the dollar and on the dollar systems for having a unit of account. So the concept of Qi is that we can emit Qi relative to hash rate. The cost of producing a hash is largely dominated by the cost of electricity. So if we set up sort of an options game with the miners that they can pick a Qi or a Quai as a reward when they mine a block, we can create a Schelling point where Qi then should become attached to the miner's production cost, i.e. the price of electricity in long-term equilibrium. And then if you sort of create games and you create markets, you would expect the market to be able to achieve equilibrium efficiently, right? And that really is the concept of Qi. So the concept is really having, if you think of the dollar as the petrodollar, maybe you can think of Qi as the crypto electric dollar on a decentralized network. And that's really what we're trying to do, because we think that electricity is a good mechanism for creating a unit of account which maintains purchasing power parity with time, right? Because energy is the most fundamental input to the economy. And if the market was perfectly efficient, when energy prices change, there would be an instantaneous repricing of my tea because one of the primary input costs changed. Right now, there's this like lagging, whip function that happens in the bullwhip thing that happens in the supply chain and with pricing. But if it was efficient, this would be priced in Qi, and then Qi would immediately sort of change its purchasing power relative to the price of electricity. And then this actually, without being repriced in the unit of Qi, would effectively cost the same, even though it may change in other denominations. So it's actually potentially a more efficient way to denominate the whole economy, because you'll essentially have instantaneous responsiveness to pricing based off the primary input cost, i.e. energy. So that's why we're super excited about Qi. We think that it is one of the key pieces to sort of building the monetary system, i.e. not just having a store of value like Quai or Bitcoin, but also having a unit of account and a medium of exchange. And so introducing Qi into the system, we think we can achieve that.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. And of course, that is why it is described as energy-based money for the 21st century. I like it a lot. All right. Well, let's, go to the very famous crypto conversation hot take round, in which case I'm just going to run some questions at you, Dr. K, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. Just want kind of, quick rapid fire answers, hot take style. Question one for you, Dr. K, is simply on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum, where would you say that you sit?
I sit trying to solve the problem of creating a decentralized, credibly neutral monetary system, and whatever information I see to find the optimal path to achieving that, I will change my path accordingly.
A fantastic answer. Very nuanced, very sensible. I like it. What would you say, though, Dr. K, is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
My firmest conviction is the golden rule, and that's really what I think we're trying to achieve with crypto in society. Right? So do unto others as you would like to be done unto yourself. But what that really specifically means is that when we cooperate, it should be a voluntary cooperation. And like that's the beauty of crypto. We can create a cooperative system that's strictly
Mm.
voluntary.
Yeah.
And that's
Very,
probably my deepest conviction.
very nicely said. Okay. Look, Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. As a blockchain builder, you'd be very aware of that, I suppose. But 10 years, long time in blockchain, but cast your mind forward, anything you like, Quai Network, Web3, crypto, blockchain, what does it all look like in 10 years' time?
Well, I mean, to be perfectly honest, if Quai does what Quai is supposed to do, 10 years time out, I don't think fiat exists. Um,
Yep.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's
I mean, if it's not Quai, it's something else that looks a lot like Quai that somehow managed to market better. But given the instability that we have in the world, given
mm,
what crypto can do, if you can scale these systems with the right incentive design, um, we have this crazy adoption like curve. There was a tweet that happened at 8:30 Pacific time, and by noon, SVB was bankrupt.
mm,
Right, this world moves so quickly. So if you can demonstrate real long-term value and utility with something, um, the speed of information now is so fast, and people are so responsive to economic incentives that if we get this right, this could move so much faster than anybody could anticipate.
yeah, I mean, yeah, really interesting. And yeah, I mean that speed of information, God forbid someone sends some kind of tweet that causes a good old-fashioned bank run on the traditional system, and everyone tries to suddenly put their money into crypto. It could be interesting. Anyway, you'll be familiar with this quote. It's by sci-fi author William Gibson, Dr. K, who, of course, famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. With that in mind, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
Um, huh. That's an interesting question. I mean, I think most people, I mean, I'll give crypto as the example because I do think crypto is very much an intrinsic part of our future. Um, if we sort of fully understand what we're doing here, you get crypto correct, it is this sort of fundamental, tool for cooperation. But that tool for cooperation is sort of a monetary tool. But like with that, we get smart contracts, we get objective sort of resolution of cooperation. What we've really started to do is we've started to evolve the language. Right now, our language is highly subjective. It changes with time. We can interpret words differently. We need a court system to enforce contracts. What we're really doing is if you can scale these objective systems is we're creating an objective language for humanity. And I don't think people really understand that. So everything that comes from that base layer, you can change how contracts are done. You can change how society is structured. You can change how governance takes place. You can basically change everything that has the word society attached to it. And I don't think people have realized that yet.
Yep, yep, couldn't agree more. And it brings us nicely to the final question, Dr. K, which is what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
Ooh, okay, maybe I'll do a couple.
Please, please.
Book, I would probably say Snow Crash is right up there.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll only do one book, and then I guess for TV, I'm a fan of the Matrix trilogy still. Um, would probably be those two.
Yeah, and look, two absolutely classic choices. Snow Crash, of course, famously the origin of, I guess, the term or idea for the metaverse, and The Matrix, particularly the first film, of course, but effectively popularized simulation theory, didn't it?
Yeah,
Hmm.
well, there's actually one other here, and I guess it is simulation adjacent. But it's Tron. I don't
Yes,
like Tron, the second one,
sure.
because it's a great movie. But oh my God, it is the most aesthetically pleasing thing to both watch and listen to that has ever been created by man.
Mm.
If you are in a dark room on high contrast television and you're watching it and then you're listening to Daft Punk with a full symphony orchestra backing them up,
Yeah. Oh, great.
it's
And
amazing.
I would suggest that would be a good one to watch on the Apple Vision Pro, but yeah.
Great music to go to, by the way. I've listened to Tron Legacy so many times.
Yeah.
I could probably hum the whole soundtrack to you right here.
Shout out to Daft Punk. All right. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Dr. K, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Just take us out by telling people how they can find you on X or wherever else you like to hang out online. And again, where developers and early users, interested parties should go to learn about what you and the team are building at Quai Network.
Yeah. So you can find me on X at Mechanical K, spelled with a Kalk at the end. In terms of finding out about Quai, you can go to the Quai Discord, which are linked out from our website, qu.ai. And there's also a Quai Dev Discord. So if you're more focused on wanting to do the development tasks, there's probably better signal to noise there. If you want to sort of mine and participate in some of the social media programs, the Quai Discord is probably the place to be. So.
Awesome. And as I say, links are in the show notes, folks. Thank you so much, Dr. K. All the best, and bye for now.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, there you go. There was Dr. K from the Quai Network. Very interesting chap. Yeah, very interesting indeed. And yeah, it looks great. The Quai Network. So links are in the show notes. Be interesting to see how they go on their journey to mainnet. But I love the idea of energy-based money for the 21st century. That's memeable. It's catchy. So people can get behind that, I'm sure. All right. Well, shout out to Daft Punk too, by the way. Yeah, Tron. Great choice, great soundtrack. Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love Daft Punk? Yeah. All right. And on that note, folks, we reach the end of the show. Thanks for listening, team. This was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin. Bye for now. See ya.